In my last video, we went over the skills for the two brand new legendary cavalry commanders coming soon to Rise of Kingdoms, Ivan the Terrible and William Marshal. And ever since I posted that video, I've had a lot of you guys ask me how these new commanders might change the open field cavalry meta, whether it's the single best Cav March or a two cavalry lineup or even a three cavalry lineup in the open field. And so today what I thought I would do is share with you guys my thoughts on how I think these new commanders are going to change the cavalry meta, what I anticipate could be the best 1, 2 or 3 army lineup for cavalry, and then in a couple of weeks when these new commanders land in the game, we can look back on this video and say, hey, I predicted the Cav meta, or wow, I was completely wrong, I was totally off. And I think that'll be a lot of fun. Now let me just say right at the beginning of this video, these are my predictions for the Cav meta. Okay, these commanders are not in the game yet, we don't have any testing, we don't even have any real pre-release testing yet, so this is literally just my prediction. Okay, I'm not telling you this is the best, I'm not telling you to invest in anything here, this is just an open discussion with you guys, and you can let me know what you think about my opinions in this video in the comments section below. But before we jump in, of course, what's going on, guys? Cheers. Now, as you guys know, I am a partner creator with Rise of Kingdoms, so if you want more Rise of Kingdoms content that gives you guidance and advice for your account, make sure you drop a thumbs up down below. It really helps out the channel, and consider subscribing. We're still so close to 100,000 subscribers, and with that being said, guys, let's jump right in and use our favorite tool, the tier maker, which I have now updated with the latest commanders in the game. And I guess obviously the first place that we'll start is with the single best Cav March in Rise of Kingdoms once we get Ivan and William Marshal. Now I will say maybe we'll touch more on William Marshal in a minute, but almost certainly he will not be part of the single best Cav lineup in the game. And prior to Ivan arriving in the game, currently the single best Cav March in Rise of Kingdoms is either Gang Gamchan with Achilles, or perhaps you prefer the Achilles primary, or for those of you that are super careful with open field engagements, you might see decent results out of an Arthur Achilles, although this March is certainly a lot less common than the Gang Gamchan Achilles, and for good reason. This March deals really decent damage and is super tanky, especially for a cavalry march. This is often one of the last marches on the field, one of the last things to get sad faced because of how tanky it is due to the unique healing mechanism on Gang Gamchan. Okay, so that's kind of where the meta is at right now for a single cavalry march. And what I think is interesting about Ivan coming into the game is that he appears to be super strong, right? I think the consensus from the community is that he does look super strong. I said in my last video I wouldn't be surprised if Ivan was a Sun Tzu Prime level commander. I don't think he's going to be better than Emperor Qin. There's just really no reason to assume that just based on his kit. But if you compare Ivan to Sun Tzu Prime, Ivan has what, like 20% more stats, his active skill hits harder, his rage engine looks like it's almost as good, right? Now his active skill does cost a little more rage, and so there's not exactly an apples to apples comparison there, but my point is I think Ivan is probably going to be Sun Tzu Prime level, maybe a little bit better, maybe a little bit worse, right? Maybe he just, when it comes down to it, he just performs a little worse. We'll have to wait and see. But the interesting thing about that is that it looks like, from the way his kit is designed, that he's not necessarily made to pair with either of the commanders in the single best Cav lineup, which is a really bizarre situation to find ourselves in, right? I mean, when we look at Sun Tzu Prime, we say, okay, well, you just pair him with Bai Chi, who is the best, or arguably the best infantry commander prior to him, and that's your pair. Or you pair him with Liu Che, who was again considered one of the best infantry commanders in the game at the time, and that's your best pair. With Ivan, I'm not so sure about that. Certainly if all you have is Gang Gamchan, then okay, now you pair these together, you've got a super tanky Cav March that deals a lot of AoE damage. Or perhaps you do something like this, where you have the Achilles with Ivan, and that also performs really, really well. Now the reason that I say that neither of these commanders necessarily look like, and again I could be wrong, this is pre-release, but they don't necessarily look like they were built to pair with Ivan, is because Ivan's entire kit sort of revolves around getting the most number of authority stacks, so he can convert those into the maximum number of decree buffs. And in order to do that, what you want is as many combo attacks as possible, and we do have combo attacks in the combo tree, right? There's an instant proc. You also have combo attacks on the active skills of these commanders, and in the case of Achilles, he casts his active skill multiple times when he absorbs enough damage from the field, and so there's a little bit more there than the Gang Gamchan, but there isn't any instant proc combo damage damage built into the skills of either Achilles or Gang Gamchan, and that's why it's not that these pairs are bad, but it just seems like in order to get the maximum effectiveness out of Ivan, you're going to want to pair him with a cavalry commander that deals combo damage. Okay, this is all stuff that we've covered in my last video, so I do apologize if this sounds familiar, but with that being said, I honestly would not be surprised if the single best cavalry march when Ivan lands in the game is Arthur with Ivan, right? Which is very weird because, like I said, historically we often see that whoever was in first place just falls to second place and the new guy takes that first place slot. But in this case, we would see King Arthur, who has been a second Cav lineup commander, bump up into the best slot here, and it's just because of this synergy. Okay, now again, I could be wrong. The pairing could be something with Achilles, and that would make a lot of sense intuitively, but that is kind of my expectation, right? It's some combination of Ivan with any of these commanders, and if I were to be a betting man, I would say that it is Arthur Ivan. Now, why do I think it's Arthur Ivan, right? Because I did mention this pair a lot in my last video, and I got some people kind of questioning why I think this pairing is so good when historically we look at somebody like Arthur Achilles, and this pair has not really moved the needle as much as people thought it would because it's so squishy, right? I mean, you look at, there's a lot of attack here, barely any health, there's a little bit of damage absorption from Achilles, but all in all, this is a glass cannon march with tons of damage and tons of march speed, but it dies really quickly, right? So why would I sit here and say that, okay, well, replacing Achilles with Ivan is going to change the game, right? Well, the answer is pretty simple. Ivan's kit has tremendous amounts of tanky stats. You have 50% defense, which is the highest defense stat on a single skill out of any commander in the entire game, which is insane. I think the exception might be like Trajan can eventually stack more defense than that, but like out of the box, Ivan gets 50, which is crazy, and he gets 30% health, right? So you have 80% of tanky stats, and they just gave him a little bit of attack just to sprinkle it in there, right? Which is just insane. So all in all, the difference between the Arthur Ivan and the Arthur Achilles in my mind is that Achilles is all attack based, whereas Ivan is all defense and health, right? Like that's his entire kit. Now, he doesn't have the sort of damage reduction that you see on Achilles that he kind of absorbs and turns into active skill casts, but even still, I think we're looking at a commander that has enough raw defensive capability to complement Arthur and make it so he's not as squishy as something like the Arthur Achilles. So hopefully you guys can understand why I don't necessarily think this is going to be as much of a glass cannon as the Arthur Achilles, and why I think this is most likely to be the single best Cav march, even though we will have to test and see. And again, I just want to be clear, it's not that you can't run Ivan with these other commander pairs. I think it's just the commander with the most obvious synergy is Arthur. Okay, with that out of the way, let's move on to the two cavalry lineup here, and this is honestly super simple because with Arthur getting a really great pair that pushes him up to that top slot, or in theory I would assume it would, maybe I'm totally wrong about that, that makes the two pair lineup super simple, right? You just use what we've already been using as the single best pair, and this is kind of the position that we found ourselves with Sun Tzu Prime as well, where Sun Tzu Prime kind of converted William Wallace into an AoE commander, and a lot of people were like, okay, great, we can keep running Bai Chi Liu Che, who was the best infantry pair prior to Sun Tzu Prime, right? Now Sun Tzu Prime comes out, he's so good all on his own that you can pair him with somebody as garbage as William and still do decent, right? Or in the case of Ivar the Boneless, you can slap Ivar the Boneless behind your Sun Tzu Prime and again continue to run the previous best infantry march in the game, which was Bai Chi Liu Che. And so in the same way, I think that with cavalry we now have a new best march because of Ivan, and we just continue to run the already existing best cavalry pair as just your second Cav march, and you're good to go, right? I really just don't see that this changes at all. The only way that I could see this changing is if you are a cavalry player who maybe skipped Gang Gamchan, right? Maybe you saw the single target damage and the healing and you said absolutely not, right? Maybe you were burned by Shujar back in the day and you just didn't want to have a repeat of that, so you just didn't get Gang Gamchan, in which case you would need something like Attila, right? You would do the Attila with Achilles. This commander pair is tried and true. Lots of players really love this pair. The downside is that you do kind of need the arch formation for Attila. You could use the delta formation, but really, like, if you're going to run this, you need the arch formation, right? Like it's kind of non-negotiable there, unfortunately, and a lot of players don't have that. And I also wouldn't recommend that you build that either, right? Like for the average open field player, you should not be, investing in an arch set set for open field. It just doesn't make any sense. This is really a set that, you know, if you have it, great, continue to use it, continue to have it for, you know, garrison, whatever, even rally basically. But that's kind of the only way that you can run this, in my opinion. If you don't have the Attila or you don't have the Arch or whatever, another thing you could try potentially, if you still have the wedge set, you could do something like this maybe. Honestly, I wouldn't really recommend this. I'm kind of just putting it in here just to give you an option if you've still got wedge or wedge 2 for cavalry. And frankly, you kind of need wedge 2 because the Hua pairing is so outdated at this point that if you don't have wedge 2, like, don't even really think about it. So I'm mentioning it here as a technicality pretty much, but you know, there might be some people out there that still have, you know, the wedge or the wedge 2 for cavalry, and maybe you could try something like this. But I would certainly not recommend investing in Hua in 2026. I certainly would not expect the second pair to do super well. It just is what it is. So I wanted to at least mention it here, give you guys a couple of different options. But I think the obvious, right, I mean, what are we talking about? The obvious two cav lineup is this. There's probably not much discussion there, kind of an open and shut case. Now, the much more interesting topic of discussion is a 3 cavalry lineup, and this is the question that I got the most. I think this question, and also what's the single best cav march, right? Those were the two questions I got the most. Very few people are asking about a 2 cav lineup, right? Like, that's pretty much set in stone. People are asking about the 1 and 3 army lineups, and so let's talk about it, right? And this is, again, we are in super speculative territory at this point. I was even discussing this with some people in my alliance Discord. Shout out to RK, shout out to Attila. I've been thinking about this 3 army lineup, and I wanted to get the input of some of those guys as well. And there's a few potential options that we kind of arrived at, and I want to share them with you guys because it could go in many different ways, honestly. Okay, the first one that I want to talk about is kind of the one that I think is most appealing, at least to me as an outsider who, you know, I don't run 3 calves and I have no intention of running 3 calves, but the one that makes the most sense intuitively in my mind would be something like running the 2 cav lineup as we have it. Your third set would be an Attila march, and then Attila has a couple of different pairs, right? You could either do the David, you could either do the Philip, and again, this would have to be with the arch formation, right? If you don't have the arch formation, you're not really running Attila, especially as a 3 cav player. Like, you kind of have to have it, right? This is sort of the 3 army lineup that I would assume would be the meta for a 3 cav lineup when we do get these new commanders coming into the game. Okay, I think this is also a good time to talk about William Marshal and why he hasn't seen himself in this video thus far. And the reason for this is because the more that I look at his kit, the worse it looks to me in the open field. And the reason for that is because the active skill, first of all, I was completely wrong about the active skill in my last video. I totally misspoke, and it's because I made the assumption that this damage factor was a double hit every time. And the reason I made that assumption is because literally every single combo commander in the entire game does a double hit except for William Marshal. So if you're wondering, like, why would you make such an obvious mistake, it's because it's logical to make that assumption because it's literally been that way every single time for every combo commander. But anyway, despite the logical explanation for my mistake, it was still my mistake, and I do apologize for that. This active skill actually is a 2700 damage factor. Okay, you hit 3 targets for 1000, the next turn you hit 3 targets for 900, so we're up to 1900. Then the following turn you hit 3 targets for 800, so we are up to 2700 damage factor in a circular AoE. It happens over the course of 3 turns, and so what you end up with is a active skill that is about as strong as Liu Che's active skill, slightly worse than commanders like King Arthur or David IV, for example. However, it happens over 3 turns. Right now we have to test the commander to see how he actually works. If those commanders run away, do they still take the damage ticks over time, or do they have to stay within your AoE circle? I suspect they would have to stay within range of you, right, which is a little bit of a downside there to the skill. And by the way, I showed this chart in my last video as well, and people had a lot of questions about this. Don't think too hard about the numbers for the old commanders. Okay, I haven't updated this chart in a very long time. You're going to notice Sun Tzu Prime's not here. Okay, so don't pause the video and start, you know, comparing all these commanders. Just focus on the commanders that we're actually discussing here in this video, the cav commanders. Okay, and maybe if you guys are curious about how I calculated this total damage, because a lot of people had questions about that, perhaps I can make an entire video about this, because it seems like there's a lot of misinformation about, oh, there's a 50% cap on 5 targets, and that's super outdated information. So maybe one day I can make an entire video about this. But either way, this is all napkin math. I don't want you guys to take this as gospel. All I'm trying to compare here is the total potential max damage of that active skill across commanders. That's the only thing we're looking at here. Okay, I digress. What we see is a strong active skill. The debuff is a little bit less relevant, but it is a little bit weaker than, again, David or commanders like King Arthur or Ivan, right? The second skill is 35% attack and 20% march speed, and we've seen that exact distribution of stats for cavalry before in the form of Philip, right? And Philip is, you know, love him or hate him, he is notorious for being super squishy for calves, right? I mean, there's just no way around it. This is a small amount of stats for today's meta, and it's all attack. And I'm not going to say that attack doesn't have a place anywhere, but when we're talking about cavalry and we're trying to build a third army, the 35 attack, 20 march speed distribution historically has not been great when it comes to longevity, right? Like you're probably going to pop in the field. And so I really struggle, and that's it, right? By the way, that's the end of the kit when we're talking about open field. You can't look at any of the other skills because they don't do anything in the field, right? Even the second half of the second skill does nothing in the field. And so when we think about, okay, active skill is a little worse than David and King Arthur, second skill is on par with Philip, who is on his way out of the Cav meta, right? It's like, you know, I really struggle to see how William Marshal can find himself in the current Cav open field meta right now. Rally, totally different story, right? And I don't want to discount that. He looks like a beast when it comes to a rally, but if what we're talking about is an open field cavalry lineup, I just don't see him having a huge advantage over whatever we already have, right? Because even if you look at somebody like Philip, you know, Philip, sure, he deals less damage, especially like with the active skill, right? The active skill is really the star of the show here for William Marshal. But Philip, you know, he's got his instant proc, which is certainly weaker, like it's not even close, it's much weaker, but he's very supportive and he has a huge damage amplifier for whoever he's paired with, and he gives you the same number of stats, right? And he's supportive for the nearby armies. And so, like, you know, yes, you're sacrificing the damage, but there's other things he brings to the table to where it's like, okay, well, why would you run the 5511 William Marshal? And maybe I'm wrong there, but you know, it's just not a good look when his closest comparison is the guy that's getting kicked out of the meta. It just, to me, I'm not really seeing it, right? And you could also compare him to somebody like David, and you could say, okay, well, David, you know, all of his skills don't work in the field, right? And that's true, but again, let's explain why people use David in the open field to begin with. Okay, the active skill is as strong as King Arthur. We just went over that, right? So David's active skill looks like, and again, we'll have to see with William Marshal, but based on the wording, it appears to be stronger than William Marshal, just point for point, and not to mention, it's in one swing, right? He smacks everything all at once, 2 combo attacks, boom, everyone takes all their damage and you're good to go, right? Whereas with William Marshal, it's boom, 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 3 small hits in a row. That's a pro and a con, I guess, right? I see it more as a con. You also have the cleanse. The stats here are 35% defense instead of attack, and for me, I can only speak for myself, but I would rather the defense in the field for cavalry because of how squishy the 35% attack actually is. You lose the march speed here, which is definitely a downside, but the trade-off there is that you pick up a whole other skill, right? The 4th skill works in the field. It says whenever this commander uses an active skill while attacking a troop on the map, the target takes up to 40% more combo damage for the next 3 seconds. Okay, and so this is a debuff on the target, massive combo damage taken increase, right? Really good stuff here for the open field. And so yes, you lose the march speed, but in exchange for that, you get a cleanse, which I think this cleanse is better than the 25% march speed reduction and healing reduction on William Marshal, a better stat in my opinion, and a whole extra skills worth of value. That's a debuff, and all your other combo damage commanders are going to perform better in the field as a result of this debuff, right? So when you compare William Marshal to David, it's like, you know, if we're going to reach deep into the bench to try to find a rally or garrison commander to use as one of these pairs, I'm not sure I'm seeing the logic of using William Marshal over what's already here, because we've got commanders that are comparable, if not better, right? And so that's kind of why, like, for me, I just don't see it personally. And again, I could be wrong. I don't see William Marshal landing in any of these lineups at all, frankly, and we'll just have to wait and see. Now, does that mean he's not usable in the field? No, I think at 5511 he's a great budget build, and maybe there's some pairs there that you would prefer, especially because these other commanders that we're talking about and comparing him to do require either expertise in the case of Philip or 5515 in the case of David, which is more sculptures, right? So of course he's better. But all that being said, if we're talking about the very best, right, the actual best 3 army lineup for Cavs, I just don't see this dude falling in any of those lineups. Okay, so now that you kind of know my thoughts and opinions on William Marshal, now that I've thought about it for a little bit longer, with that out of the way, let's talk about another potential option for the 3-army cav lineup with the introduction of Ivan. And frankly, it would just be a rearranging of these commanders. What we might see is something like the Gang Gamchan with David and then the Attila with Achilles, right? And this could also easily be a 3-army cav lineup that we see run in the open field. Of course, again, you would need the arch formation here for the Attila with Achilles. The Arthur Ivan is, I'm skeptical splitting this up. It just looks like the pair that everyone's going to want to run. Your best gear and your best armaments would go on this march, of course. And then the Gang Gamchan David is just your super tanky march, right? David gives Gang Gamchan an AoE. He gives him a little bit of extra defense and he gives him a really solid debuff on the 4th skill, a little bit of a cleanse there. And then Gang Gamchan just does all the healing, the single target damage, and he has his defense reduction as well. And so this is more of like a, you know, a supportive march, tanky march, that sort of thing. It's also going to be the slowest on the field probably, so keep that in mind. Like, you might get caught in the open field, so there's that. But this is, you know, another way that I could possibly see cav players running a 3-army lineup in the open field. If you are not sold on the Arthur Ivan sort of match made in heaven, you have to pair them together. Let's say you don't buy that, right? Which is fair, right? I mean, he's not even in the game yet, so we don't know if that's like the de facto you must pair them together. What we could see is actually a Gang Gamchan with Ivan, which is a pairing that I talked about in my first video, saying like, look, there's not exactly the best synergy, but there's a lot of defense on this march. There's a lot of healing, tankiness. You take 10% less sev wounds from Ivan, right? Which is another way that he separates himself from somebody like King Arthur or somebody like Achilles. Not only does he have all those tanky stats, but he's literally going to take less sev wounds, so the trades are just going to look better, right? I mean, there's no way around it. And if you do that, right, then you would just leave your Attila with Achilles, you put David on the bench here, and then who you're going to run with the King Arthur? Well, we just got Vercingetorix, right? So you run the King Arthur with Vercingetorix. That's a bit of a, you know, you've got the damage and everything on the King Arthur. Vercingetorix is a bit more supportive. He's got the shield. He gives you that damage amplification for 1 second on his expertise to make your King Arthur hit like a truck, right? This is literally just the new version of what once was the Arthur Philip, then it was the Arthur Hector, now it is the Arthur Vercingetorix, right? And so this would be another way that I could see players run calves or a 3 cav lineup. I don't love this lineup, to be honest with you, just because, again, I'm not super convinced on the synergy of this pairing, and it just feels like you're selling both these commanders short, right? You're selling your Ivan short, you're selling your Arthur short. Not to say that Arthur Vercingetorix doesn't do well, but I just don't think it's going to do as well as something like this. And so that's kind of why, like, this is the 3rd option that we're discussing here in the video, because I'm not sold on it, but I wouldn't be surprised if this ended up being the 3-army lineup. It's just, in my mind, the least likely that we've talked about in the video so far. And then the last one that I want to talk about here, and there is a very good reason why I saved this for last, okay? And that is a 3-army lineup that does not include Attila or Vercingetorix. We leave the Arthur Ivan together. We do the Gang Gamchan with Achilles like we always have, or you flip these depending on how you run it. And then your 3rd march is Hua Zhong. Okay, and this is, in my opinion, the least likely to be the 3 cav lineup when these commanders land in the game for the average player. And the reason that I am specifying that is because I have been told, and you know, I was not there, but I've been told that a lot of whales in the 93 kvk that just happened, the Kingsland, a lot of them were running the Hua Zhong as a 7th march, right? Now, in order to run this, you need to be a giga whale, okay? So this, let me make that very clear. This is not like a, oh, you know, if you're free to play and you still have this, you can use this. No, it's actually the opposite. Okay. The only people that can run this are people who've actually gone in and got wedge 2 for everything for calves, right? With all of the best special inscriptions, rare inscriptions, whatever. Those are the people that could probably most likely make this work. Okay. And so, you know, at the end of the day, like, for the average player, is this usable? Almost certainly not. Almost certainly not. It's just both these commanders are very power crept script at this point. They're very old. But if we're talking about a 7 army lineup where you're running 3 cavs, 2 infantry, 2 archer, then maybe this is the play if you have the armaments to support it, right? And that's the other part of this where it's like, I don't think you should get them, right? I don't think you should get those armaments. You should not be getting wedge 2 for cav right now as a regular normal everyday player, right? If you made that jump when wedge 2 came out, then great, you can still use it and get, you know, however good of reports you can get from this. But for me, I'm just not really sold on this. Again, I think that the Imperium kingdoms are playing a whole different version of Rise of Kingdoms than the rest of us, because the open field engagements are insane. The swarm meta is insane. Like, there's just, those guys are playing on a whole different level that actually like really does not translate super well to the average player, right? To the free-to-play player, the low spender, even the medium spender. Like, even for me, the last time I tried to run Joan behind a Hua, it was a meme. Like, it was literally a joke. Like, this March for the average player is garbage. I even recently made an entire video about why the meta is like literally different for the high-end Imperium whale players. So if you missed that video on the channel, I highly recommend you check it out, because it'll put a lot of things into perspective for you. I also got a lot of really positive feedback from you guys on that video, so a lot of people really liked it. So if you haven't seen that video yet, I highly recommend it, and it'll help you understand why a March like this might perform super well for some high-end players but perform horribly for the rest of the player base. So unless you've gone all in and maxed every armament you possibly can for this, I don't know how well it's going to work, but I did want to at least mention it here in this video because it does solve a couple of problems, right? It keeps the Ivan with the Arthur, which I, at the time of recording this, suspect to be the best March. It keeps the Achilles with the Gang Gamchan, and it doesn't require that you have some of the, you know, leadership commanders. It doesn't require that you have some of the, you know, garrison commanders or Attila from a long time ago, right? If you're a newer player, maybe your Attila has different gear on it because he's going to be, you know, a part of a garrison or whatever the case might be. I don't know. Maybe you don't want to mess with him when you're just doing open fielding. Okay, so I wanted to throw this in there. You could try this, you know, you could see if this worked for you. I would not run this, frankly. That's just my opinion. Like, for me, from my experience, this March is totally dead to me, right? Like, it works for players better than me, so I'm including it here. But I haven't had this March work in maybe a year at this point. Like, this March really has seen better days, and so I'm not gonna sit here and tell you to invest in this. I'm not gonna sit here and tell you this is your best option for 3 calves, but I'm gonna sit here and tell you that it is an option for 3 calves, and that is where I'm going to leave it. Okay, but with all that being said, this is what I expect the 3 cav meta lineup to look like when we get Ivan in the game. We'll have to wait and see if I'm right about this. Maybe I'm wrong about this, and you guys can let me know in the comments if you agree with this prediction or not. And while you're down there, please consider dropping a thumbs up on the video. I don't just say that every time. It really does help out the channel way more than you think. And double check down below to see if you're subscribed, because I know a lot of you guys, you think you're subbed and you watch a lot of the videos, but you're actually not subscribed. You can always unsubscribe later if you don't want to, but consider subscribing down below. With that being said, guys, thank you so much for watching. This has been Omniarch. I'll talk to you guys again soon. Peace.